Hi and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Title, where we get to meet with and learn from some of the best professionals out there on what makes them and of course what has motivated them to be who they are. Joining us today is Prantik Mazumdar from Happy Marketer, now part of Dentsu Global. Hi, welcome Prantik.
Hi, Steve. Pleasure to be here. I've had the good fortune of interacting with quite a few folks from Insider, and really happy that I get the chance to be part of this internal nice little initiative. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, thank you. You know what? I've been learning about you. Of course, a lot of our insiders know you well, but I've been reading up on your LinkedIn profile, and I saw that you were you're one of the 50 most influential marketers on the planet. That's an amazing title to have. Is there a story behind that?
Well, yes, this is something, I'm again very fortunate. I think this happened around Feb 2015 when there was a World Marketing Congress, and yeah, someone wrote to me to kind of request me to submit an entry, and I did. And in terms of so they had they had the usual criteria of work done and
Sure.
uh, impact on clients, etc., etc. So yeah, that was a fascinating event that happened in Mumbai, and so it happens usually either Singapore, Mumbai, or some other part of Asia. Uh, and it was exciting because the story there is, I originally come from Pune, and my parents lived there, so they were of course very happy and proud they could drive down from Pune and we could attend the event together. And I think the one of the fascinating things was that on that same year, one of my clients also happened to be there from Singapore. His name's Sam Ahmed. He used to work for Starbucks or Mastercard back then, and so was there were at least 4 or 5 people from Singapore. But it was good to be there with parents and with one of my favorite clients.
Awesomeness, awesomeness. Now, let's get to know a little bit more about Prantik as we go into this call. So, uh, you mentioned, right, a lot of what you do comes from passion, comes from, doing what you really believe in. So, what is it that motivates you get out of bed each morning? What's your Ikigai?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think, that's so true that I think in life, unless you have a strong why, I think it's been about 15 plus years in the industry. So my career is after I graduated, I worked for the Singapore government. So there was 3.5 years of public sector experience. Then I moved to a couple of private sector enterprises, small, medium enterprise. And then I started on my own. And now once we have sold this, I'm into my first corporate corporate gig, if you will. So it's been an interesting journey, and I think the why that's remained, I would say, fairly constant is there are a few whys. I think hence the Ikigai, the three-circle Venn diagram. I think to me, the element of knowledge, something that satisfies my curiosity and knowledge, and what I like to internally call perceived knowledge. I think that's a huge driver. That if I very early in the game, I realized that I can't be in a job where I have my blinkers on, and I can't
Sure.
experiment and I can't learn from different people. So I think that thirst for knowledge is a big one. The next one is being able to meet people. So I think a platform of this sort is fantastic. Or so my day, I just can't be behind a desk, so to speak. Or even if I am, I need to be connecting with people through platforms such as Zoom, StreamYard. So that's the second driver. And the third is I genuinely think that being in a position to impact people in a certain way. Now, impact doesn't always necessarily mean charity. It could mean various ways, right? So for me, for example, it could be in terms of motivating people. So I think as part of Happy Marketer, one of my favorite things was to just hang out with people. So I think, I don't know if Ria is watching this. So every time I would go to Bangalore, my favorite days were just spending time with folks in the Bangalore office, getting to know them outside of work, right? Or it could be teaching something. So I do a lot of training in Singapore on topics around digital. So I think any way that you can
Yeah,
create positive momentum or positive impact in people's life, it's usually time and knowledge more than money. I think that gives
so
me a
true.
lot of satisfaction. So I think these three things are a big part of my ikigai, and if you can somehow throw cricket in that, I think life's perfect.
See, I'm happy you're saying this because one of the common themes that we've had at BTT with all, and we're fortunate to have this, but with all the interviews we've had, every single professional we've seen, like yourself, is driven by making not just themselves, but their community that's around them, the people that's around them, happy. And for those who are watching BTT right now, Ria is one of our most amazing creative talents who's had the chance of also working with Prantik and does call Prantik her mentor. So that's actually great for bringing her in, name dropping her in there. Thanks so much, Prantik. Now, speaking about, life itself, if life were a movie, what character would you play? Me particularly, I would love to be Batman, but that's a more fictional character. So what about you?
Good question. I mean, I'm a big Bollywood buff, so if I get a chance, I would want to be Shah Rukh Khan in I don't know. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people don't follow Bollywood, but there's a particular movie that I'm massively influenced right from my childhood. It's called DDLJ, and just celebrated 25 years. So if you are hand to heart, that's the character of playing Raj in Switzerland. But I think you know, I think a character that I've kind of looked up to in terms of a real character played in movies. Probably two. So one is a sports example, and the other is a scientist. So I think John Nash. If someone sees A Beautiful Mind, I
Yeah.
think that was a movie that really influenced me. The other is again being a big cricket buff. I think I've been a so my personal favorite cricketer is, as with I'm sure billions of people, is Sachin Tendulkar. But from a movie, I would probably choose India's ex-captain MS Dhoni. I think that movie, I'm a big fan of that. Also, just the impact that he's had on a generation, primarily given where he came from. Someone who's come
Yeah.
from a small town city in India and then rose up the ranks and then has led the country. I think it's the element of leadership and people management is that's something that I kind of relate to.
Oh, awesomeness. Can I ask you the name of the movie? I haven't watched Dhoni's movie, by the
It's
way.
it's called MS Dhoni or Dhoni: The Story Untold. Yeah.
Dhoni, the story untold. For those who are looking for it, that's the movie. DDLJ, that is Dilwale Dulhania Le Jayenge, which is an amazing Bollywood movie by Shah Rukh Khan. So if you've got the time, guys, do catch it this weekend on Netflix. I think it's already there.
It's there on Netflix.
Amazingly nice, nice storyline, very romantic. Now, you mentioned you like to connect with people, right? On platforms like Zoom or StreamYard or any of these lovely platforms. But what is the one app that keeps you sane and structured, through your day? Because again, now you're part of this amazing corporate structure, but even before then, you were, Happy Marketer was a busy, busy agency. So, what's keeping you sane?
Keeping me sane, I would say two things. I think one, it's surprising. I think the just I do use my calendar app, and that kind of honestly keeps me in a particular rhythm and structured. So very weirdly, the Google Calendar app I think does a great job. It's very simple, but it just and I'm someone who kind of likes to wear, I like to kind of be very transparent. I'm not the kind of guy who has his professional and personal life separate. There is this whole philosophy of work-life balance, or there's a philosophy of what do you call, it's like a Jenga. Work and life kind of happen, in
Yeah.
between as and when. So given that mode, I don't really differentiate. So I think having a calendar where I have all my personal and professional activities put out there keeps me structured. But I think since you use the word sane, I would also mention medium. I love reading, and I think, of course, I do read the New Yorker, the Economist, etc. But I think there is something very real and tangible about
Yeah.
blogs written by people like all of
Everyday
us,
people. Yes.
everyday people, right? I thoroughly enjoy. Just yesterday, I came across a beautiful piece on it's a piece written about one of the founders of a very large creative agency called DDB, and it's a historic piece about one of the founders and his perspective on creativity. How insights drove creativity, about some of those seminal ads that we may have seen in the 50s and 60s in the
Yeah.
Mad Men era. So I think it's those realistic articles. Honestly, every time I take a break, apart from I'm a big fairly active on social media, but I would make it a point to at least read two normal articles on Medium. So Medium.
Hey, I'm a huge fan of Medium myself. I don't read a lot of people on Medium, so I pick and choose a few. And because
Uh,
my line of work is marketing, I do enjoy reading this guy called Tony Himes.
yeah,
He's one of the media managers of Shiseido Global, and
great.
he calls out on a lot of bullshit, jargon that people put out there. So
Yeah,
it's worth actually reading. You're right. It's everyday people talking about everyday stuff that does affect them, and
yeah,
it's always nice to get that perspective. No one's putting too many facades out there. Google
absolutely.
Calendar now, because I know. By the way, what's the story behind this lovely picture of you that we've used as a creative with your son? And what's his name?
His name's Ayan. He's 4 years
Ayan.
old. Yeah, that story is it's from one of our vacations a couple of years ago. And so yeah, it's a fascinating story where I think one thing I was just telling a friend of mine that I'm really blessed is that this year, in a very weird way, I'm so happy that I don't have to travel that often for work. When he was at that age, when that photograph was taken, it was pretty much every week that I would have to travel somewhere for business. But and I think it's coincided well. I think since 2.5 years old, I think kids kind of tend to express themselves. You can play,
Yeah.
you can take them out, and I think I've been very fortunate that this year I've got a lot of time to spend together with him. In fact, there used to be a joke that. So I think when he was around that age, when that photograph was taken, I used to travel to Manila very often. And so whenever he would get, he would either miss me or would get angry at me for whatever reason. When I'm leaving and I'm going somewhere, he would just look at me, and so he calls me Baba. So he would just look at me and say, "Baba, you go to Manila." That was his way of expressing displeasure.
I'm not.
Uh,
I'm definitely not want to see you right now. You can go ahead.
yes, yeah, you can go ahead. I don't need you. That's his way of expressing displeasure. So yeah, that was at the age where he was obviously tinier than what he is today. Very very innocent, but yeah, that's uh, I'm really really blessed that have had good chance to kind of travel with both him and my wife Dipti, who's a doctor. She has a very bit busy schedule as well, but I think this year we really had a very good opportunity to kind of spend time within the borders of Singapore. But yeah.
Awesomeness. By the way, what was your first job? Now, you're an entrepreneur and everything, but what was your first job?
Well, my first job was actually with a. This is during my student days when I was in year two in NUS in Singapore. I started as a part-time database entry guy at a very large MNC called Alcoa. Alcoa
Okay.
is into aluminium and various kinds of metals. So there was a very kind gentleman who just I was looking for a part-time gig as a foreign student to make money, extra money in Singapore. So he just asked me to do a data entry job, which I was very grateful for. I did that for 6 months, and then I had two serious internships thereafter at Accenture in Singapore. So I did a good 12 months internship again while studying during the break. But my first official full time job was with the Singapore government for a body called IE Singapore, International Enterprise
All
Singapore.
right. Uh-huh.
And yeah, so I mean, it's a fascinating organization, the Singapore government as a whole, because, I grew up in India for 13 years and then I did my high schooling in Indonesia and I grew up there for about 5, 6 years. Having lived in two very dynamic emerging markets. Yet we know that these two countries obviously, unfortunately, have challenges on the government side in
Sure.
terms of corruption, etc. To have a chance to work in a government or body in Singapore, so this body was responsible to drive foreign trade with other countries. And it's mind-boggling the way a government can run like a private enterprise. It's fascinating, the
Very
pace,
nice.
the so my role for the first year and a half was to work with local tech mobile startups to help them go international. And in the last 2 years, I was responsible to drive any kind of foreign investment into Eastern India, uh, mostly real estate, mostly infrastructure. But I think the efficiency of the government, the transparency, as well as the fact that a small little country, which a famous Indonesian politician had called it. I suppose he meant it as an insult, but I think to me it shows the power of the country. He called it the little red dot, essentially saying that you can't even see this country on the
Yeah.
map. But to see a country of this nature, which is just 55 years old with no natural resources whatsoever, it gets its water from its so-called rival state. For it to kind of punch above its weight, I think that was a great jumpstart to my career. So yeah, that's where I started my. I spent my first 3.5 years.
Awesomeness. And if you could take one lesson from this, what would you take?
From my
From your
government role.
yeah, if you could turn back time and if you could do something differently, or if you could take back a lesson and say, yeah, this is what I should have been implementing all my life, what would you take?
So I'll tell you a lesson, and I'll tell you what I think I could have done differently or better. So I think one of my biggest lessons, in my first job uh, was what to kind of understand and crystallize what's expected out of me. I still remember it was a very second week, and my boss had asked me to kind of analyze something and come with a presentation. I thought I did a great job at the presentation, but he clearly didn't think so. And he turned around and he said, "Look, so what I had done very well, I think, and which he acknowledged, is that I analyzed the problem, whatever he had given me, to the T. I did a great job, and I highlighted a lot of problems. I said, this is wrong, this is the problem, this needs an improvement." And he turned around and said, "Look, I haven't hired you to tell me the problems. You either tell me a solution, or you at least propose and recommend some solutions and the rationale behind it." And I think that's a message I've carried all my life, and I share with my staff, with my colleagues. Is I think a lot of us bring analysis as a skill set, skepticism as a perspective, which is important. But I think the flip side, what's important is one part of the brain can be used to analyze a problem, to the good and the bad. The other side of analysis is to be able to synergize, is to
Yeah,
be able to stitch the different pieces together, to narrate and story tell better, and to be able to solve that problem, or at least make a recommendation. So that's been a huge. It's a very small episode in that early first month of my career there, but it stuck with me. And whenever I meet Andrew, my one of my first bosses, I tell him I'm extremely grateful for that lesson, because I think it also helped me during my entrepreneurial career. Is you always, there are n number of reasons why something can't work, but all you need is one reason for it to work, and you need to focus on that solution, and then you need to believe that you can make it happen.
Is
So
that
that
also a leadership challenge you face as your, again, the entrepreneurial journey, right? Is that also a leadership challenge you face in teaching your staff or your colleagues that, guys, it's not just important to bring problems to face. What are the recommendations of solutions and what's your rationale behind it?
absolutely, I think because simply, especially the younger folks, because I'll tell you why. Because I was speaking to someone a couple of nights ago. He comes from the probably number one MBA school from India. So if there are guests from India, it's he's from IIM Ahmedabad, the top MBA
Huge.
school.
Yep.
And then he's worked in some of the large consulting firms. He was head of strategy at UBS Bank, and he said, one of the biggest challenges of, again, he was referring to his education system, but I think it applies to most education systems, especially in Asia. I think there is an analysis paralysis. I think we are taught very well how to analyze a problem, to look deep, but I think our education system does not encourage or teach us a few skill sets in schools or colleges. Is uh, this whole thing of solutions,
Yeah.
finding creative thinking to find a solution, or you can hypothesize that there are 10 problems that I anticipate, but you got to force your mind to think there's always a way out. You got to believe that.
Of course.
And I think that's the part that usually lacks, no matter how good a student he or she is, simply because for 20 years of our lives we've never been trained to think that way. We've always been trained to think of, hey, tell me more about the problem, analyze the problem. Even when you do your critical essays, you're always looking at breaking a problem down.
True.
Very seldom are people taught. So this is something you have to learn as you get to the industry, that I think very few bosses would be happy if you just go back to them week after week with problems.
Of course. Of course. Now, what are your hopes for the future in such a, let's say, yeah, where we are right now is a unique but also, both unfortunate but also fortunate time of our lives. Many times we're able to spend more time with our families. As we said, there are companies who've excelled in being digitally responsible, and there are, of course, a number of things we can take, but again, there are a number of things that have paralyzed society as a whole. So what are your hopes for the future, both for your industry, but also personally?
Yeah, I think, firstly, I think this has given us time to pause and think. The very fact that you asked me this question, I think if life was normal, business was booming, I think humans unfortunately need a crisis or a kick in the backside to kind of take a pause and think. Which and personally that's true for me as well. I just think we tend to our society, our culture, our workplaces incentivize doing and not thinking.
So true.
So something that we have tried to institutionalize in our company is guys take a day off every week to just sit and think. I think we need humans. The biggest difference, ironically, amongst humans or any other animals in the kingdom is the power of thought and creativity, and So I think I'm glad about that. In terms of being hopeful, notwithstanding COVID, I think of course COVID has, I'm sure this people would have seen memes about it or read articles. It's definitely accelerated a lot of things which may have happened otherwise.
Yeah,
No two ways about it. What I'm really hopeful about is conscious competence or mindfulness when it comes to being responsible global citizens. That's honestly what I am uh, very hopeful about. And what do I mean? I really mean there have been trends about sustainability, all of that going on in the world, right? Every business has a CSR initiative, every business has a
so true.
charity. But I think what I'm really hopeful, and I think we are seeing evidence that uh, companies and people are getting mindful about sustainability as well as change as well as
Yeah,
climate, etc. Just last Friday I was moderating a TEDx panel in Singapore where there was the head of Twitter from Singapore, there was the chief sustainability officer in the largest bank in Singapore, DBS. It's amazing that a bank has a role such as a CSO. That's a
I'm
good
taking
sign.
that as a note down, by the way.
Yeah, that could be your next application. Yeah. And there was a professor from INSEAD, or the number one business school, and the topic was this: is transforming corporations and companies when it comes to sustainable. What was very encouraging is this, right? So I, as a moderator, I was talking about there is a global organization called the Business Roundtable. It's essentially the leaders, the collective body of the largest companies in the world. And this year, we're celebrating 50 years since a famous economist called Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman,
Mr. Friedman, yeah,
he postulated this theory that the only responsibility of a company or a corporation is to serve at the pleasure of its stock shareholder, which means all that you need to do is drive profits so that the shareholder is happy. It's been 50 years that companies have been running with this mission. Only last year, this is pre-COVID, 2019, the Business Roundtable turned around and changed that statement. So a statement that has been lingering on, been archaic for 50 years, suddenly they've changed that we need to move away from the just the pure stockholder, so to speak, the shareholder. We need to take care of the other stakeholders, employees, communities,
good.
suppliers. To me, that's a huge sign. And then when I was questioning the leaders from Twitter, DBS, and the professor, they are actually seeing a massive change actually happening in the business. So the
So true.
banking gentleman said the bank is actually rejected funding businesses that are into fossil fuel, right? So they're actually rejecting revenue.
Yeah,
The lady at Twitter talked about data centers. They're actually very conscious about, what kind of data centers do they work with, don't work with. And one of the things that the professor said is the movement is very strong in Asia for two reasons. One is the Asian companies usually are family owned businesses and are not listed on the stock market, which means they don't really have large public shareholders to report to. So, change can happen quickly. There's no baggage, so to speak. And the other heartening thing, which I'm most hopeful about when you ask me that question, is the change is being driven thanks to the consciousness and mindfulness of employees. The employees are driving change within that. Hey, are you
so true.
sourcing this Starbucks coffee from in a responsible way? Is your company energy neutral? For example, Dentsu, it was very heartening to see now that I work as part of Dentsu, they've become the first company in the industry to be 100% energy neutral.
Awesome, and congrats to Denso on that. And I'll just add one thing. I'm being a bit more cautious in time, given that
Yeah.
we do want to end it in a particular time. But being mindful of time here, Richard Branson mentioned this as well. I think about 4 years ago when he spoke at an event, he said that I want to turn Virgin from a customer centric company to an employee-centric company, because at the end of it, our employees are our ambassadors in any and every line of that company. And I think that's a great thing that Dentsu also does. And I know from what you've been telling me, you as the founder of Happy Marketer is also inspiring to do in your company.
Absolutely. I mean, I totally believe in the fact that it has to be employee first, because especially in services organization like ours, we exist because of people, right?
Yeah,
So if people are not happy, if they're not motivated, nothing moves.
so true.
So absolutely, no two ways about that.
Last question for you. Uh, what was the weirdest moment in your life? What is that one weird story that you haven't shared much with too many people, or fact about you?
Good question. Let's see. I think something that very few people. I think again, if I look at weird or let me think. This is a tough one. Uh, Yes, I think with a lot of people, what I haven't really, I mean, some people obviously the closest people know about this, but many don't. Is that two things? I think now that since I'm opening the kimono, I might as well. One is that so I was always a very good student in school. Till my high school, I come from a family that's academically focused. I would typically be in the top three. But I think a fact that very few people don't know and is that in college I've failed a module. And today it seems funny and it's happy to share about it. But back then it wasn't, because for a so-called topper in school to come to university and fail in a module, I think that was disastrous, primarily from a social embarrassment perspective. I think that's one because, but I can tell you this. I was addressing another company and I was sharing very transparently. Is I can't tell you the positive impact of that in the longer run, because to be able to face failure socially with your family, with friends, colleagues, etc., is it's a game changer, because then suddenly you realize, wow, I mean, nothing can go wrong. And I think that attitude eventually definitely helped me in my entrepreneurial career or as a salesperson as well, because I guess you start accepting failure quite well.
Awesomeness.
And so yeah, that I think that definitely, if I look back, it was weird, awkward, embarrassing. You can call it everything. Yeah.
Awesomeness, Prantik. Great to have you on board. Great to have you at BTT. I'm looking forward to your session at Uplift APAC later on the 19th of November. And
Absolutely.
again, thanks so much for joining BTT. I'm looking forward to many more conversations with you and the Dentsu team.
No, thanks, Steve. And again, a big thanks to Ria for kind of inviting me. I'm glad we could make this happen. Also, Patrick and Bipin, etc. I mean, Ankesh. I think we've been chatting. We've been working on some accounts together in Singapore. I'm really loving the fact what you guys have been doing. I was a big fan of the large event that you guys hosted. In fact, I think I saw you there.
Appreciate.
Yeah, for the first time. I loved. I think especially I still remember the chat that you guys had with the gentleman from Sequoia. So I think what do you guys have?
Peter.
Yeah, what do you, Peter? Exactly. What do you guys have done in terms of these digital events? Fascinating. Keep the good work up, and yeah, I look forward to working together with Patrick and team in the region to hopefully do more work together in APAC.
Thank you so much, and you make me blush, Prantik. Thank you so much for that. And for everyone else watching BTT right now, we are back here every Thursday, 10 a.m. CET, 4 p.m. SGT. So please do join us. And if you the Beyond the Title interview, please do drop us an email or